Hey Jake, how you doing?
Hello, not too bad. How are you, Oscar?
Not too bad, not too bad. I think we've got Sophia about to join us as well. So I'm really keen on this conversation because I know how important you guys think it is to make sure that the great gameplay, particularly with hyper casual, it's got to be completely there off the bat. And rather than me talking rubbish, I'm going to let the much more eloquent Sophia to come and talk to you. And so I'll leave you guys to it. Okay, Sophia, over to you.
Thanks,
Thank
Oscar.
you. Yes, first of all, I will apologise to all of you for being ever so slightly late, and to you, Jake. I was
No worries.
in the other track room with the lovely Langeli from Mixie, so I'm sure if any of you want to check out that talk, because you've been watching this one, that'll be on the YouTube, and the links will be sent out to you ever so shortly. But to get down to business, I mean, I know who you are, and you know who me are, but I will say, my name's Sophia Drake. To those of you who don't know, I lead the Big Indie Pitch, of which Kwalee are our digital season sponsors, and have been our sponsors for before that in the old days of the physical world for a while. So it's great to be doing this fireside chat with you, Jake. And we're obviously super grateful to Kwalee. But normally I'm the one introducing you to the speaker, to the pitchers. But I think this time, let's let you do an introduction. Tell everyone about what you do at Kwalee and who Kwalee are, just in case they don't know.
Hello, I'm a publishing manager at Kwalee. My name is Jake Parker. So we work with developers from the point of submission and even before that point, building on a prototype and working on ideas, all the way through to globally launching a game. And we kind of get involved in every step of that process as publishing managers and support the developer while liaising with the team at Kwalee and all the different teams that get involved in the development of a game, to ensure that the game has the best possible chance of success. So as part of that, we're kind of looking at data analytics, we're looking at game design, we're looking at all sorts of kind of steps towards making that global hit, essentially.
Yeah, and you're working with, I mean, I know we're going to touch on all of these things, but, just to reiterate to the audience as well, you're working with different developers of different sizes as well, and, and really helping them make the most of their hyper casual game and experience.
Yeah, so we're working with anything from a single developer to a small studio to even a larger studio.
Yeah.
And providing support that's kind of tailored to what that developer needs and where their specialty lies.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, sticking on that topic, let's dive straight in, because I know some people have been waiting, yourself included, which again I'll apologise for. Okay. But how involved are your in-house designers and the publishing team? How involved are all of these different aspects of Kwalee with the developers, whether they're a small studio or a one-person team? Like, to what level is it bespoke, and how much or not are they involved?
So typically, from a developer's perspective, you'd have your publishing manager as your main point of contact, but that publishing manager will then be liaising with every member of the Kwalee team to give a game the same support that any Kwalee game would get. So it goes past the game designers, we review levels. We've had game designers jump into like Unity for some of our games and create some levels, change how levels are laid out so that we get the kind of optimal flow through the game for players. So where we need to kind of support with that game feel, we get game designers kind of working in tandem with the developer to set stuff like that up.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, and I suppose it works as well depending on what the studio needs as well, like how involved they need people as well.
Yeah, of course. It could be that it all it needs is kind of a conversation with the designer to talk through this stuff, and then there's somebody who's already working on design. Like, everybody's got some design thinking when they're developing a game and when you're kind of conceptualizing what this game could be. But there's always support we can provide from our designers who can kind of help guide towards the goals of a hyper casual game.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. And within the team, people like yourself will be the publishing managers and all the other aspects of the team. I mean, what kind of experience do you guys have to offer to the developers who are coming along? I mean, I hasten to use words like credentials, but you know what I mean? Like, what is your experience that you're offering to those guys to help?
So typically everybody on the publishing team has made a game in the past. So there's some level of base credentials that we're looking for anyway. But on top of that, like Alan, one of our other publishing managers, he's got a master's in game design. And we've all got experience of working with many games from the point of submission and from testing and reviewing and analyzing that data to kind of build up this knowledge that we continue to build on as we're kind of working through games. But as well as that, I feel like I'm incredibly lucky to have this whole team of people that I can just kind of go and talk to, and instead of just asking kind of, oh, what information should I pass on? It's the perfect opportunity for publishing managers and the publishing team to understand fully why these things are working in hyper-casual, why they make a difference, and how that can be passed on to culture developers to kind of continue to improve the games they're making and continue to hit the mark for hyper-casual.
I suppose that's really good as well, because what it means as well is not only can the team understand and appreciate where the developers are at, if they're potentially a one-man team or a couple of people, they, you can empathize and understand where the thought processes are coming from. But I suppose you can also, that allows you to give better advice easier, because if you've been in that situation in the past, you can be like, oh, I know exactly what they're doing, give me a second, I can help this because I've been there.
Yeah, it starts to get to a point where it's kind of like second nature. You can look at a game, have a play of a game, within a few minutes you've got some key points that would significantly improve one area or another area. And ultimately the thing that proves that or disproves whether that advice is the right advice is when we test a game and it performs better or worse because of that change.
Yeah, exactly. And I suppose it's just a constantly evolving knowledge base as well, because it's not just using your past, but it's then exploring new problems and finding solutions to them to help the devs.
Yeah, and I think with the nature of hyper-casual is that it moves quite quickly, and you'll get to a point where you think, okay, I understand what hyper-casual is now. I think I know what to expect. And then somebody will release a game that is completely out of left field. It's not something that you expected at all, and it works, and it's a hit, and there's obviously something there that has worked really well. So I think the thing that's really exciting to be a part of this publishing team and to be working on hyper-casual games is seeing that change and that growth of hyper-casual as a genre, really.
Yeah. So the next one, I think, is always a question that people are interested in because it gives scope. And now I'll have an insight into the answer from my days, years and years ago, working at Chilingo. But, I wanted to talk to you about, how many games do you test? How many developers are you speaking to? Because I think sometimes, especially myself working with indies, there's sometimes a misunderstanding that, oh, I'm too small, I shouldn't email because you'll be too busy or anything like that. Like, oh, you must see loads, so what's the point in sending over? So I just wonder, how many are you, and what is this sort of usual... What's a normal amount of developers where you're not thinking, oh, it's a busy day, it's just a standard?
Gotcha. I think most days are busy days, but we love it. And I think there's no harm in kind of sending it across. If there are concerns about whether somebody's going to be too busy to look at the game, the worst case scenario is it'll be a couple of days and then somebody gets back to you with feedback on next steps. So we're working with a large number of developers and a lot of different games. But typically, as soon as you have that relationship with a publishing manager or one of our publishing executives, that relationship will continue. They'll be there to give you feedback and give you advice, and you can even just throw ideas past them just to get a first opinion before you put any time into investing into making a prototype. They can kind of advise on what areas to focus on or how to make sure that prototype you're developing saves you time in terms of not having to dig too deep and work on too much before you've tested it and you understand what the CPI is, for instance.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and I suppose a lot of the time, if you get in there earlier, I mean, obviously there's a thing about being too early, but if you get in there early enough, that can really help, because as you're talking about with the CPIs and everything like that, if you're doing that collaboratively, that can actually, I'm guessing, potentially alter the development cycle as you go later on through the learnings from these testing cycles, basically.
Yeah, definitely. There's always things that will kind of alter the development of a prototype while we're going through and learning these things from CPI tests. And that's having that close working relationship with developers is something that I really enjoy, because it means we can be closely collaborative and we can start understanding what avenues to kind of go down in order to change how the performance of a strong prototype is looking.
Yeah, I suppose just one thing I wanted to flow in, because I think, again, this is the kind of thing that might be of interest. I mean, in what ways do you normally communicate with your developers that you're working with? And what I mean by that is it an over, is it using emails more, or are you on Zoom, or are you meeting up in person? Is it a mix of the three? And also, what do you prefer? I mean, I know at the moment the in person's a little bit difficult, but let's pretend we're back in the nice old days and the future days.
So I definitely prefer meeting up in person but it might just be because I've missed that a lot since lockdown. But meeting up in person, talking on Zoom, talking on Skype, we've got Slack channels set up with some of our developers. Yeah. Essentially anything that enables us to have that collaborative relationship with the developer, and as best as we can recreate kind of working as a full team. Because when you're working as a team, you're able to quickly it's the kind of thing where in an office you'd be able to look over someone's shoulder and like tweak little values and play around with little things to see how they look quite quickly. And it's replicating that as best as possible with quick communication and a strong understanding of game design.
Yeah, so it's basically exactly the same thing that I prefer as well, which is anything that replicates that quick, instantaneous feel, rather than the sending an email and waiting 3 days for a reply. It's sort of having a time of like, okay, for this next hour, let's work together on this.
Yeah, and I think there's also a place for like emailing and waiting for replies. Maybe developers are doing this kind of thing in their spare time. It's something that you've got a full-time job and you're doing it outside of that. We're still able to kind of accommodate calls and close working in those situations. But a lot of the time, the most convenient way for developers like that is to talk through email. And in that case, it's a case of getting everything as clear as possible in that email. So there's no need to wait for the next email to kind of see what the feedback is.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm following on from that point, but also touching base on an earlier point about how, as you say, not only is every project different, but the hyper-casual space is evolving so fast that you're seeing things you maybe haven't seen before and great new ideas. I mean, how do you go about identifying with the game, what the game developer's experiencing, and maybe identifying which team members are best to help in that particular project?
So typically we're quite heavily involved in each project. So it becomes quite clear quite quickly what areas need a bit of targeting. And sometimes even just playing the game for the first time, you'll see, okay, I need to chat with the designer. I need to play through this with one of the design team just to get a bit of feedback and input, so we can kind of guide where that is heading and make it feel more satisfying and more dynamic for the player, as opposed to feeling like really binary and feeling like instead of the player's choice kind of having some kind of impact on a level of how the game feels, instead of it feeling like, oh, I've done the right thing and now I've got to wait and now I've done the right thing. So you can often spot ways of improving game feel quite quickly, and that helps to identify like, all right, I need to talk to a designer, or the game feel might be fantastic, it might be great, but the KPIs might not be high enough. You might have low retention. You might see there's a specific level that is incredibly difficult. So at that point, you can talk to the data analytics guys and get a set of reports from those guys, for instance, on, okay, how are players interacting with these specific areas of the game to identify ways that we can improve it. Yeah. And that's typically collaborating with the developer once we have that information as well.
Yeah. And I mean, once you've got that information and you're sort of analysing the project and you're going into, testing phases, or you've done levels of testing phases, do you get a good idea of what is and isn't going to market well? Or are you kind of driven largely by the data on that side of thing? Or do you, having done this for so long, have an idea of we are going to need to change this bit before we even get to the testing stage?
Yeah, I think typically there are things you can spot that you can intuitively tell won't market well based on having tried that stuff in the past and based on previous tests that we've seen come through and the results of those, and how there, like, potentially there's no indication that is going to start becoming something that is marketable. So yeah, there are areas where we can see things quite early on that could use improvement. But there are also areas where we can spot things early on that we see have really good potential, and then we test them and see how they perform.
Yeah, fantastic. And on that point, how closely are you working with the marketing and ads teams, or are the developers working with the marketing and ads teams? Because you maybe have gone through all this testing, you've got the project, you've learned from the test, I've used the word testing again, but you take my point. You've learned from all that incremental, soft launches potentially in all those areas. How do you then go about working with the marketing and ads teams in order to take that final completed project to, as best as it can do in the market?
So once we run our initial tests with a game, we will get our marketing team involved. Then, if we see some strong potential there, we can get our marketing team started to work on kind of optimizing the creative, but also establishing some key points of feedback that a quick implementation, but could have major impacts on the CPI and how successful that marketing is. So it's something that is ongoing, and they're typically working with the developer and with the publishing manager to continue to push refreshing the creative and continuing to work on ads that could help the scalability and the performance of the game.
Yeah, and I suppose, in the interest of having a holistic approach to the whole thing, I wanted to also touch base on, the fact that, as we all know, hyper-casual games are long-term experiences that require, support and backing as they go, whether that be through timed events or whether that be through tweaks, new content. How long do you guys at Kwalee typically support developers and the game post-launch?
So typically it's for as long as the game continues to work. Rocket Spy is one prime example of this. That was launched, I think it was 1.5 years ago, and we're still supporting that. We're still working with the developer to kind of keep that moving forwards. There are some games that lend themselves really well to new content and new updates for fresh content, and some games that will continue working with what is already in there for quite a while. And I think we're willing to work with developers and more than happy to work with developers over a really long period of time after globally launching a game. That's never the kind of end point of the publishing process. It continues from there. With typically there's less time needed from a developer's perspective, so you can start to focus on new prototypes, new concepts, and what else you're going to test, as opposed to being kind of stuck working on the same game for an indefinite period of time. It's typically smaller updates and SDK changes and stuff like that to continue to optimize how the game monetizes and markets.
Yeah, I just think that's a really interesting point, because I think a lot of developers might potentially think that the moment of launch is kind of the point, and the marketing, but that launch, window, I suppose, is maybe where your support ends. But like you say, it's bespoke. And
yeah, and there's definitely during that launch window, there's definitely like an intensive period where we're continuing to look at the data, we're continuing to optimize the game and the design of the game, because that's when we start seeing the biggest push in data that we've kind of seen up to that point. As soon as you start acquiring a significant number of users, you can start analyzing how they're interacting with the game and optimizing based on that.
Yeah. So, obviously there we've looked at the whole cycle of how you work with the developers as a team. But if I, because I think this will probably be of interest, it's certainly what I hear at the pitch, and I think it'll be of interest to a lot of people watching. If we sort of cycle it all the way back to the very beginning, what kind of things would you say to anyone in the audience developing a hyper-casual game? What are the core things that you think that they need to have in their game, maybe a certain type of field, certain type of graphics, any sort of advice you can offer them for the kind of thing that you guys at Kwalee are wanting to see, the kind of games that you're like dying to come through your email box? Is there anything in particular that you're looking for?
I think one big thing that I'm always pushing on is making it feel dynamic and making it feel like it's not just a binary kind of, oh yeah, I've done that thing, now on to the next thing. There's something a little bit more to it without it becoming too crazy in depth. You can make a game kind of feel like the player's action, no matter how small, it has some kind of impact on how the game plays. So you feel as a player like you're having an impact, and there's a significant difference in that, in both how it comes across in ads. Like the gameplay mechanic is one of the key parts of getting a strong CPI and making sure that gameplay mechanic is easy to understand, but also it looks like it's going to be fun to play, and it looks like it's going to be engaging, and it looks innovative and fresh. I think focusing on those kind of things, especially in the early stages, and focusing your time so that you can build a CPI prototype, which doesn't necessarily need to be loads of gameplay. Just focus on that core to see if that works first, and then push from there.
Yeah, so you would say even when someone's sending a game over, elements such as the polish and the graphical thing, the graphics and stuff, they're elements that for hyper casual, for you guys, they can potentially come later. It's the actual core basis that you're focusing on as the genesis of the project.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for having nicely polished visuals in your initial ads, but it doesn't need to represent the final product. It needs to look nice enough for people to not see it and say, "Oh God, no, that's all grey boxes." But it also doesn't need to be fully polished. It doesn't need to be the final product.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the thing that, you're obviously saying, and I'm sort of trying to nudge, wink, wink to everyone as well, is, you don't have to leave it too late, because like you guys say, and I know from my last Fireside with Simon, it's more about getting there at a time when you can begin a collaborative process, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I noticed that we're coming up to time, but and to anyone in the audience, if you do have a question, quickly pop it into the Q&A section for Jake. But one thing that I think we often sometimes miss in these areas is, I mean, I know we've obviously got the Big Indie Pitch where and you guys are our season sponsors, which we're super grateful for. So the first thing I'll say is if anyone wants to show their games to Jake or to Simon on the team, then you guys are always there normally as our judges. So definitely get your hyper casual games submitted to the Big Indie Pitch over on bigindiepitch.com. But, outside of the pitches, how else can developers, what is the best way for them to, pitch a project at you, basically?
Get in touch. So you can email us at publishing@kwalee.com. There's somebody manning that all the time, so that's always going to get responded to and picked up on. You can find us on LinkedIn, obviously. Just search for my name. The Kwalee website, we've got a submission form on there, which just asks for kind of key information like the game name, and then either provide a video, an APK, or a link to the build on the App Store, and we can have a look at the game and start going from there.
Yeah, that was the next thing I was going to say, is what kind of information do they need to have? Because I know it from the pitch that every once in a while you'll get someone who just does a description, and sometimes it's a bit like, well, we might need a bit more than that. And then equally, although it's not an issue, there's some people who will do too much. I'll say too much. We'll give a lot of information. I don't think there's ever too much, but we'll give a lot of information. But you explain there is a sweet spot where you're not spending massive amounts of your time, but you have provided enough information for you guys to do your job.
Yeah, and I think that can kind of start at any point. We're open to working with developers who are sending through ideas and a kind of presentation of this is what my vision for the game is. Because it's always good to start at the vision for the full game and then kind of pair back to the point where, okay, we can CPI test this in a prototype. So it can start at any point. Even if you've spent months working on a game that you've already got, we can still start talking and talk about that game if it's something that you're looking to test and kind of work with.
Yeah, I mean, and I suppose the thing I'm getting from all of this, well, at least I know because I work with you guys, but it's a very friendly place, and it's about, don't be afraid to reach out to you guys with a project that you've got.
Yeah, and we're more than happy to give advice and feedback on games that have been sent through, ideas that have been sent through.
Yeah,
the team's constantly growing as well. We're still growing as a team, so it's really exciting to be a part of that and know that we can accommodate more and more developers with each new team.
Yeah, I actually know that from just from following you guys and obviously working with you guys, that in various departments you actually have two of my former colleagues on your team as well in different areas. So I know a range of the experience that you guys have got. We have got one question in. It sort of touches on some earlier areas that we've spoken with, but I think if some people are interested in these things, there's no harm in reiterating and going over certain elements. So Mount Meredith has asked, how soon should the collaboration between developer and publisher start? Does this depend on the type of project or how much has already been made? I know we've talked about it being bespoke, but do you think there is a sweet spot that it's better to be closer to?
I think it's worth starting early in the project. Ultimately, you can start working with a publisher at any point. You can start working with them at the point where you've got an idea or the point where you've worked on this game and it's pretty much ready for release. if you start working with a publisher in the early stages, you can kind of build more of a collaborative approach where you can incorporate feedback from the publisher and how, like, the information that they're able to kind of get from the design team, the development team, et cetera, and everyone that they work with, and use kind of that experience that a publisher has to continue to build your game and help it to grow your company as a developer. Whereas at the other end, it may be that it's harder to make these changes on a game that you've kind of developed in a certain way, thinking a certain way without that external input. And that doesn't mean that, like, we've worked with games that have been at that point and we've tested them, they've tested pretty well, and we've moved forward quite quickly. But it's always good to kind of, I feel like as a developer, you would learn more from the early stages and getting involved with a publisher and collaborating in that way. But typically anywhere is fine.
Yeah. So it's basically earlier is better if you can, but don't be afraid to send something later on in a cycle, because there's always scope to work with developers and help. And you're obviously always looking at projects of all different shapes and sizes, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I think that's a really good place to round up. Looking at the time, Oscar's back. Oscar will be joining us for the pitch on Wednesday as well. So I'm excited.
I love it. I think it's such a harsh thing to do as a developer, but such a hopefully useful thing as well. So, and I don't know about you, Joe, but I find it really great to find people who got, and whether it's the people you meet the first time, the game they're showing first time, or the game they're showing the fifth time, but you see this progression of their capability as well.
It's always fantastic to kind of see how that developer and that game have kind of grown over time and taken on board the feedback from previous judging sessions as well.
I think actually that's one of the sort of biggest things for me. It's again, it's whenever we work with investors, that the thing that always comes through, it's like, we're actually more interested in the team than the game. I know that sounds like a terrible thing to say if you're a game developer, because you want to worry about the game. But actually, the trust of the team and their ability to listen to people like Jake and Simon and various other people in the Kwalee team, and any other publisher, any other team. I mean, obviously, we work on live ops a lot. Just knowing that the people will listen to people who've done it before makes a massive difference.
Yeah, and I think, especially with hyper casual games, the fact that you can try a few different ideas and it then not work, and then find a hit. And working kind of consistently and taking on board feedback as part of that process, we tend to see it help developers a lot reach the point where their testing in that game has a huge amount of potential compared to the first game they tested with us when we first spoke to them.
And like you say, with hyper casual, the simplicity, the kind of specialization of what mechanics work and don't work and why, and the kind of ability that you can, really change profoundly the take up by the art style. Those kind of small nuance elements that really you can't know. No one who's not doing it every day can know the broad breadth of knowledge. So anyway, so on that note, Jake, Sophia, brilliant stuff as always. Thank you very much. And hopefully everybody has taken from that just how important it is when you're thinking about user acquisition, when you're thinking about growth of the company, you've got to be focusing on the success and the capability of the game. And the game is the heart of it. The love of the game really comes through. We don't get organic growth. We don't get App Store optimization unless it's backed up by something that people care about.